Lost and confused with Last Epoch coming out for its full release in just a few days, maybe you're on the fence about whether to grab it or not, and you want to see what kind of gameplay experiences the game has to offer. Maybe you know for a fact that you want to play the game, but aren't yet sure what class or even what mastery is the most interesting to you. Maybe you're just wondering if this game lets you band up with a cluster of man-eating squirrels and command them to do all of the killing for you. Yes it does.
Oh yeah. It's all coming together.
Today we're going to dive in and talk about the 5 different base classes as well as the 3 masteries that each of them has available. Masteries are essentially your deeper specialization within your class. They all draw from similar themes and playstyles that come from the base class, but take them into notably different directions and shifting the feel of your gameplay thereafter pretty notably. In Last Epoch, you cannot change your mastery after you choose it, so it's definitely a commitment to make, but it's worth noting, relative playtime wise, getting to mastery choice is pretty quick, so don't feel like it's too late to change if you feel like you've made a mistake with your choice. All that said, let's dive into our first base class, the Primalist. Very simply and plainly, this is your nature magic warrior, drawing a line somewhere between a barbarian and a druid, conceptually speaking, with the various archetypes in fantasy being, very well, as the namesake says, primal in nature. This class gets your big classic leap movement ability, it's got big melee swipes, it has nature magic attacks with things like lightning or wind dealing cold damage from a tornado, poison attacks, and you can even summon minions to fight for you, like Thorn's Totems, which are a static minion, which if you don't know is a pretty big deal because the minions that move in this game have a harder time hitting enemies, but minions that are stationary and placed by the player have pretty much perfect aim. But then Primalist also has access to more living companions, such as wolves, to fight alongside them. The masteries then expand on all of these things and specialize you into one of those concepts. Shaman is fully diving into the elemental nature magic side of things here. Wind magic, lightning, even some cool fire stuff if you spec into it, earthquakes, and then you've got Fury Leap as well. It's essentially just an elemental barbarian as a concept, and as well as that, Shaman gets ways to boost the power of totems, including the Thorn's Totems, which can make one of the stronger builds in the game if placing static minion totems that essentially just create a bullet hell for your enemies sounds like a fun way to play to you. As well, Shaman gets bonus attunement stat and also 50% bonus elemental resistances while they have a totem active. Then we have the Druid. The main deal with Druid is full-on shape-shifting, becoming your main way of playing the game, with a lot of your gameplay being based around keeping yourself in your transformed state as much as possible, as that is where all of your damage and often defenses will come from too. Though passively, Druids gain 70% damage reduction for 2 seconds after changing forms, and also gain just 20% increased health and mana to make up for the more melee-focused nature of the mastery. The 2 main ways that people tend to play Druid at higher level are werebear builds, where you just get to walk around as this massive tanky bear with big chunky hits of damage, or the Swarmblade form, which turns you into an insect that looks like it could be the reverse inspiration from Scyther from Pokemon, which is pretty badass, honestly. And a lot of the time, this is mashed together with a giant frosty tornado following around it, so you just fly around as a bug with nature itself doing the dirty work around you, with literally a natural disaster happening over top. Other things that are unique to Druid specifically include Spriggan form, which is essentially just a nature spellcaster but with shape-shifting transformations mixed in. Quite a cool one conceptually speaking, and a whole different way to play than the other 2 more melee, smashy, focused build archetypes for this mastery. Then the 3rd mastery for Primalist is the Beastmaster, which is likely exactly what you would expect from the name. This is your companion-based mastery, all based around the different creatures that you can summon, gaining an extra summon limit so you can have an extra companion compared to the other masteries, and getting a 50% boost to both your own and your companion's melee damage. Not to mention, the companions themselves will eventually your summon wolves from base Primalist, essentially just turning into summoned squirrels. Genuinely one of the strongest builds in the game, as silly as that is, and it's just incredible. But you can also summon a whole host of other creatures that are exclusive to the Beastmaster too, such as bears for tanking, though they are quite weak pre-release in this current moment at least, scorpions for poison damage, frenzy totem to buff you and your companions, a saber-toothed tiger or a raptor is just more general damage focused pets as well. So essentially every ability that you gain from your mastery is pet based here. After that, let's talk about the Sentinel. This is your more classic knightly fighter type warrior, hefty armor, beautiful plate metal, large weapon and shield. Aside from the aesthetics, this class is honestly a big recommendation I have for players who want an easier time starting out and adjusting to Last Epoch, because a lot of their defensive needs are baked right into the base class and how it functions. Where a lot of other classes need to purposefully build tankiness into their builds at later stages, Sentinels have all of their masteries just sort of become tanky by default because of the base class, which lets you focus more on augmenting the rest of your experience, which I find to be quite freeing personally. Your basic attack skills pre-mastery then are a classic whirlwind style spinning attack, which is great. We all love that in this kind of game, let's be honest. Some cleaving swipes, reposting parry attacks, javelin throwing, shield bashing, just your classic big tanky guy with a shield type moveset. But when we get to the Masteries is where Sentinel really starts to branch out into different directions. First we have the Void Knight, and this is essentially a shadow magic warrior. It's exceedingly badass thematically. The animations for it are all just absolutely sick. Like, you literally have a move called Erasing Strike, and when that skill kills an enemy, they are deleted from existence. They just turn into a goddamn void hole in the air, and that is awesome as hell. Void Knight just by default gets bonus melee void damage, but also has a 10% chance on all melee, throwing, or void skills to have it repeated a second time by a void echo, which is almost like a shadow from the void, doubling up your attacks occasionally, which is pretty dang cool. Unfortunately, the Void Knight has had some pretty hefty nerfs in the past, so unless they go back on this a bit in the 1.0 patch, Void Knight is one of the weaker masteries, relatively speaking, but definitely not unplayable by any means. You should take any statements of power with a grain of salt for sure, because every mastery is more than good enough to do all of the content currently in the game and theoretically in the game at launch. It's just a matter of efficiency that decides how they compare to each other. After that, we have the Paladin Mastery, and this is exactly what you would expect from the name: Holy Warrior of Light, auras, buffs, heals, and big smashy hammer attacks. If you plan on doing multiplayer content in the game, I highly recommend having someone in your party as a Paladin if they want to play it. It's just ridiculously desirable later game, applying buffs to all allies around them and just tons of support, while also being more than strong enough in their own right with their own abilities too, as every buff that a Paladin can apply to others, they can also apply to themselves. You also get bonus damage equivalent to how full your health is, which gives it an offensive benefit to the healing that it has too, and you get healing effectiveness scaling with your attunement stat as well. A fun version of Paladin that exists as well as that is Judgment Aura, which essentially just makes you radiate damage in a small circle around you. Then you just play a movement-focused bullet hell type game, weaving in and out while the damage happens nearly automatically around you. Then the final mastery for Sentinel is the Forge Guard. This is thematically extremely interesting and a much less typical archetype, as the Forge Guard's main deal is a sort of companion warrior. You create magical weaponry actively and armors that then float around and fly around and fight for you or protect you. Right now it's in a bit of a weird place, this mastery. The devs have said that it is specifically on their list for things that they want to rework sooner rather than later, so it could see some pretty major changes pretty soon. But the base theme of it is such a solidly interesting and unique concept within games like this that I think if you're into what that is, it definitely is worth trying out and trusting in the devs for the changes to come to it. Moving on to our third class then, let's talk about the Mage. And if you're thinking of Mage, you know what you're doing. It's the big crazy wizard magic class, elemental damage of every kind, massive, sprawling, beautiful spell animations, teleportation, shields, fireballs, and even some interesting attacks that can deal multiple different types of elemental damage simultaneously, which is really cool. As you progress further into it then with the masteries, the first one is going to be the Sorcerer, and Sorcerer is a relatively simple, just sort of evolution of the base Mage class. Bigger magic spells, but the best ones are Black Hole, which can just sort of be the ultimate setup ability, dragging enemies together, for Meteor, which is your big pop of damage as a Sorcerer. Generally speaking though, if we're talking about power levels, the Sorcerer is completely outclassed by another mastery, even in the similar overlapping areas, with the only reason to play it over the other one is because it's quite a bit easier, because the mastery that overshadows it is the Runemaster. This is a sort of Invoker style class, and I say that both because it's the name of an archetype, but also if you've ever seen or played Invoker, the hero in Dota 2, it's quite a bit similar to that. You get a much larger arsenal of spells than Sorcerer or base Mage, and you have to invoke different elemental rune combinations during your gameplay to actually gain access to cast the different spells that you want to use. It's got interesting ticks and oddities that make it special compared to every other mastery type in the game, and as far as effectiveness, if you get good at how this class plays, it is essentially just better than Sorcerer at everything that Sorcerer does, just for the cost of being more effort. It's a higher effort class to play, especially as a baseline, the mastery gets 30% increased elemental damage and 10% increased cast speed with all elemental spells, and Sorcerer also is focused around elements, so obviously this is just sort of better at the same stuff. Then the third mastery is completely unique from the others, which is Spellblade, and this is a really fun archetype in my opinion, the magic character that also wields a sword. You get enchanted weapons, flaming weapons, you can fire spells out of the sword itself, and even literally shatter frozen enemies with it, which executes them at low health, but is just, again, a really cool conceptual attack if you like the idea of a magic swordsman. After that then, let's move on to class number 4, which is going to be the Rogue, another very typical fantasy game archetype, and in Last Epoch, the base class is all about movement. Quick melee strikes, poisons, void damage, flasks that act like grenades, distractions, decoys, and even another one of those stationary minions, which is the Ballista. The masteries, however, get far more interesting than that too, with Rogue getting Bladedancer, which is just sort of melee-focused mastery of all kinds, focusing around shadow clones and essentially just bringing out your inner ninja, staying incredibly mobile and doing high damage while the clones help out as well. This is just a typically solid mastery as well, Not the best of the best, but far from the worst as well. Then we have the Marksman Mastery, and this is where you get into the more ranged side of Rogue, with bows mainly being your weapon. You can call down rains of arrows from above, you've got trick arrows like the ones that can explode, you can summon special arrows from the sky that increase your damage when you walk over them with the next shot that you take. This is pretty much just the class if you like the concept of using bows or ranged combat in general without it being a spellcaster. Then we've got the new mastery that will be coming at release for the Rogue that we haven't seen a massive amount of so far, which is the Falconer. This is the Rogue's companion focused mastery, with the ability, of course, being Summon Falcon, and you fight alongside this companion, actively doing sort of combo attacks with it, being the idea behind this mastery. It's likely that this mastery will also make good use of the bow as its weapon, so if you like the bow part of Marksman, but also want something interesting going on like a Falcon companion, this is absolutely one to check out for yourself. I would think of this sort of like Beastmaster for Rogue, Beastmaster with a ranged weapon instead of being melee. Then our final base class of the day is the Acolyte, and this is your classic dark magic wielding class where the Mage is more focused around elemental magic like fire, lightning, and ice. The Acolyte is far more interested in the void, the undead, bone magic, blood magic, literally stealing the life right out of their enemies. And in Last Epoch, all of these sides of the Acolyte are extremely well realized, with some really fun masteries coming out of it, with the most popular one probably being the Necromancer. There are just a million ways to build Necromancer really, and most of them aren't incredibly strong. From focusing on your skeleton summoning and adding on skeletal mages to do the magic for you, sacrificing your minions to buff other minions, giant walking golems, or even the ability to mash all of your existing minions into one massive abomination for a short period of time that acts like a goddamn raid boss, but one that is your friend. My favorite build that I've seen going around for a later game with this class is the Flame Wraith build, which gives you a static companion, meaning it benefits from that better aim that we talked about earlier with the Thorn Totems, but it just fires off a stream of flaming wraiths with ridiculous attack speed, while you yourself essentially just have to focus on survival and keeping the minions placed as you run around. It's really cool looking as well. Then there's also the Lich mastery, and this one is absolutely sick, essentially being a transformation focused mastery like the Druid, but instead of turning into an animal, you turn into a manifestation of death itself with Reaper form, using twin size and just looping over the battlefield, and this mastery essentially lives and dies by this transformation. It drains resources while active, so your entire build will generally be focused around keeping enough resources to never drop this form in combat, because without this form, you have very little power. But in this form, you are a god. Lich lets you drain the life right out of your enemies as well, and then there's the sort of overpowered thing, at least currently, that is Death Seal. This locks your health, which makes it so you're unable to go above its current value, but also increases your damage dealt and gives you massive damage reduction that scales higher depending on how low your health is when you use it. So essentially it rewards you for playing recklessly, pressing the button when you're at relatively low health, but zumping your damage up ridiculously, and then it can be permanently active. So you just find the range of health that you are safe at for your current activity, hit the button once every 5 seconds to keep your health there for massive damage and damage reduction boost, and then you just go to town on the enemies, and it is insanely strong and satisfying. Then finally we have the Warlock mastery, which is also going to be new at launch, and this appears to be a very curse focused class, essentially applying loads of different dots and debuffs to your enemies and overwhelming them with essentially chaos magic, just the idea of the fires of hell, the souls of the dead, rather than the bodies being used by the Necromancer, and then just having the souls used by this one. You also want to open up these hellish rifts of damage around your enemies too. As well, with Warlock having a heavy focus on curses, it's likely even before we see this in action that it will be quite strong later game, as curses count as ailments, and there are definitely some strong ways to build around ailments within the game. That just about does it then, everyone. Just a roundup of the ideas and feels and a bit of a talk about the relative power scaling of the different classes and their masteries within Last Epoch ahead of its official release in just a few days. Hopefully this has helped you out in your choice as far as what mastery you want to aim for yourself to start your journey, or maybe you're just checking into it to see what the game has on offer before making your opinions and decisions on if you actually want to get it. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.